Hello again, NBA fans, and welcome to another NBA Roundtable. My name is Matt Eppers. I'm a digital producer at USA Today Sports, and we are back again to break down the key storylines we're seeing right now around the NBA playoffs. To do that, I am joined, as always, by my colleagues from USA Today Sports, Jeff Zilgett and Mark Medina. Guys, we'll start at the top here with the Sixers and the Hawks in the Eastern Conference. Jeff, it's pretty remarkable how well Embiid had played despite the injury. But how long can the Sixers rely on him to do that, before it's just too much to ask?
It's a great question. And I think only Joel Embiid's knee is going to give us the answer to that. To your point, from the end of game one, even though the Hawks won that game, but the Sixers just charged back from that big deficit. Through games 2 and 3, the Sixers were the far better team. It looked like, the number one seed was going to do their job, take care of business. But here's the deal with that, what they call a small meniscus tear. I don't care if it's a small meniscus tear, a large meniscus tear, you're going to be playing in the very least in some discomfort. And we just saw DeAndre Hunter of the Atlanta Hawks. He also had the small meniscus tear, and he opted to undergo surgery. I mean, this is going to be something that Embiid is going to be able, I don't think he's going to be able to just treat this postseason after the season is done in the off season. I don't think he's going to be able to just treat it with rehab and treatments. He'll probably have to have surgery for this. And so I think the Sixers have talked to their medical staff. They've talked to Joel Embiid, and they've figured out they're just going to ride him as long as possible and see what they can get out of him, full well understanding that there may come a point where they just can't play him any longer. He can't contribute the way he can.
How do you expect Doc Rivers to sort of handle his playing time, assuming he's going to be less than 100%?
Yeah, it's a great question, Matt. Well, knowing how Doc Rivers has been over his coaching career, he always prioritizes rest at any practice time. So I don't suspect that not just Joel Embiid, but the entire team is going to do much of off-day practices. It's all going to be film sessions just to allow them to heal their bodies and clear their minds. And in Joel Embiid's case, to echo Jeff's point, I don't know if that's really enough because meniscus tears are serious injuries. They're not day-to-day ailments. And the reality is that the Sixers don't have any other choice but to rely on him. But there's this gray area. At what point will he hit a wall? I mean, think about this series itself. In the first 3 games, he was averaging 35 points, 10 rebounds. I mean, those are numbers that no Sixers player had ever been posting since Wilt Chamberlain in the 1960s. That's how dominant Joel Embiid was. But then you look at game 4. I mean, he went 0 for 12 in the field in the second half, missed a pretty open layup, in the last few seconds of the game. So it's clearly possible that Joel Embiid will go from dominant to a casualty pretty quickly. So I think the hope is, can there be a gray area where, obviously, ideally, Joel can be the dominant MVP candidate he was, but even, being an optimal, competent player is still a huge bonus. But knowing how serious this injury is, that's not even guaranteed.
Even on the other side of that particular series for the Hawks, we found out Trae Young is dealing with a sore shoulder. How concerning is Trae Young's injury?
Yeah, it's certainly concerning, but I think when you're comparing it to Joel Embiid, it's night and day. I mean, Joel Embiid is a pain injury, threshold injury. It is a structural issue injury. Here with Trae Young, it's a pain threshold and nothing more. I mean, the fact that he was able to hide it from the coaching staff and still play through it fairly well while having, kinesio tape on it shows that this is something that is more manageable.
The remaining series there between the Clippers and Jazz, both of those teams now have some injury concerns of their own as well. Clipper star Kawhi Leonard, he looked to be experiencing some discomfort in his right knee. For the Jazz, Donovan Mitchell is still playing through a sprained ankle. Mike Conley has also been out with a sore hamstring. Mark, you were in the building for Game 4 when the Clippers tied the series up. Leonard and Mitchell both downplayed things, but how concerned are their respective teams about those lingering injuries?
Yeah, well, it's an information vacuum. Neither the Clippers or the Jazz are really forthcoming on these ailments, so we only know what we know. But I think moving forward, I would handicap that the Jazz have a little bit more concern because Mike Conley's missed this entire playoff series. I asked Quin Snyders, what's his progress? What are the next steps that he still has to take before getting cleared to return? And he was pretty evasive in saying that, look, he's made progress, but he's not going to go into specifics from what the medical staff has told him. But when you're looking at hamstring injuries, those are no joke. That's something that aren't necessarily, surgery requiring injuries, but they're also not day-to-day injuries. They're very sensitive. One weird twist could knock you out a long time. And it's very clear that while, the Jazz in the regular season went 15-6 without him, they have been able to win the first 2 games against the Clippers without him. They sorely miss him. And this is increasing the workload on Donovan Mitchell. And he's, downplayed his ankle injury ever since he's returned. But I think it was clear in that game 4 that he looked more and more uncomfortable with the ailment. To his credit, he was able to fight off a shooting slump after the first quarter, but then it came back another shooting slump in the fourth quarter. So it's certainly something that we don't have the answers to, but we know to keep an eye on. Now, on the Clippers end, Kawhi Leonard was a little testy. He was saying, I'm good, next question. And I think, the encouraging thing with Kawhi is that when he was on the bench for the final, 5 minutes of the game after landing awkwardly when Joe Ingles fouled him, he wasn't getting treatment on the bench. It wasn't like he was needing to have ice packs or anything, but he seemed clearly uncomfortable. He was stretching out his leg a lot. I saw that after the foul was committed, instead of returning to the court and going to the foul line, immediately, he stood off to the court a little bit and hunched over, stretched his legs out. So clearly there is some discomfort in knowing how the Clippers and Kawhi have been over these last 2 years. They've always been cautious here. But my hunch is, even with that, it's playoff go time, so he'll gut it out.
To close, we wanted to touch on the team with its spot in the conference finals already locked up and is just waiting patiently at home for the rest of these teams to figure things out. A wise man said Suns in 4, and Phoenix obliged by finishing off the sweep of Denver pretty handily. It's easy to point to the Nuggets injuries and say they were without Jamal Murray, but I think that's shortchanging the Suns a bit. Mark, how was Phoenix able to dominate that series so soundly?
Yeah, it's a good point that you raised, Matt, about the Suns. They deserve credit for this as much as, the Nuggets deserve some fair empathy for the fact that they didn't have Jamal Murray. And, they were the lone team to get to the second round after being one of the conference finals last year in the bubble with the short turnaround of the schedule. But with the Suns, it's come down to these 3 elements. Chris Paul is still playing in the prime of his career. His shoulder has gotten healthier. The young guys, most notably Devin Booker and DeAndre Ayton, continue to elevate their game and seize the moment and not shrink from it. And Monty Williams is a really good coach.
Is this Chris Paul's best chance to finally break through to the finals and get that first championship?
I think it is his best chance. And look, I know we live in the rings culture where every player's legacy is measured on that. But regardless of whether he wins a championship or not, Chris Paul is going to be seen as one of the best point guards of his generation. But yes, he is about trying to win a title. And I think when you're looking at his playoff journey, some of it coincide with the reality of, hey, the Golden State Warriors were in the middle of a dynasty here. But a lot of the shortcomings when you're looking at his time with the Clippers and the Rockets, it either had to do with an injury of his own or an injury of another star player. And so I think that this is really a nice window into him, that whether he wins or loses, it seems like the odds are in his favor. That's not going to be because of any sort of uncontrollable health issue. And, as much as Chris obviously wants to win and is one of the most maniacal competitors in the NBA, I think that there might be this liberating feeling that finally he has a playoff journey that it's all within his control and his teammates' control, as opposed to anything external.
Winning a championship is hard, and I don't know that Chris Paul needs it. In fact, I don't think he does. But I do think it's important to some degree that he gets to the finals. And even that in and itself, for a guy like that, there's a reward. in that. And I think, you know, he does look forward to doing that if he can. Now, the championship, getting the ring, there are so many variables there that maybe are sometimes out of the player's control, but certainly getting to the finals, you know, would be a crowning achievement for any player. But for a guy like Chris Paul, who's been trying to do it for so many years, you know, I think you would really relish that instead of falling short in the conference finals.
Well, that, my friends, is going to wrap up another NBA Roundtable. Many thanks, as always, to Mark Medina and Jeff Zilgett for joining us today. My name is Matt Eppers. We do hope you enjoyed the discussion and that you'll join us again next time. Until then, thank you so much for watching on USA Today Sports.